And now you'll get to understand to which extent this project, or in which extent it has changed. Because the organization is about like life, very much like life. If it goes on, if it gets new forces to fill it up, very much, and I suppose this is it. This is going, and may I share with you how this went on. My name is Stefan Melle. Well, for 11 years I've been the leader of DRA. This is the abbreviation. Just once a year, we have like special seminars, and when we go deep into the discussion and trying to make projections and what we succeeded in, where we failed, we realize always there are so many things we didn't do. But nevertheless, every time we go out to these seminars, we really draw so much energy, and our next steps are clear. Well, we are 25 of all age, mostly young people and middle age. This is a non-for-profit, and it is a non-governmental organization. Both things, as I see it, are important in the same way, because only together can give us real independence. And when it was set up back in '92, it seemed to us that the goal was also big, to create many contacts and joint programs between Russia and Russia. You can imagine what it was like 1992, after Russia emerged again after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And these are the two largest countries in Europe. It was really important to create it out of space, but for quite a while, for 25 years, we've worked in other countries too. And this, as we see it, is of fundamental importance, because we do not see Germany or Russia without the European context. And it is exactly speaking about the common European home. And whatever happens with us, and whatever we want, and whatever we say to others, that is why from the late 1990s we work with our friends in Ukraine and Belarus, in Poland and other European countries, in the EU countries. We may put it this way, sometimes we rarely ever reach Central Asia, we just reach the Balkans, but we also have contacts and sometimes joint programs in South Caucasus, India. And the organization has kept its name, and in recent years we have argued at length, should it be this way? We are not bilateral. And secondly, it does not describe what we do. But at this time, when exactly many links and ties just break down, when it's not clear how to work in this big country, still it's very important to show these ties and to continue in the European context. As I told you, this year we are 25 years, it's an anniversary. So we celebrated like very round manner, with a personal note. But when we were getting ready for this anniversary, we thought, what are we about? And the immediate thought that immediately came to our mind was this fragile balance, because it's not clear what would be the next 3 steps. What do you do when indeed the partners are persecuted, when we are short of cash, when so many things are missing that we need for our everyday work? And we found this balance. Instead of criticism towards anti-democratic trends, and still cooperate with the countries, with different sectors and different partners. We have a partner in St. Petersburg, also German-Russian exchange. I'm flying there tomorrow, and they celebrate an anniversary on a major conference that is known as How does Europe change? This is again about civil society. And in Berlin, although we pointed out with warmth and gratitude, Lena Nemirovskaya supported us, whom we invited on purpose. And that was indeed a very, very busy several days, because you know, the question is always, why do you do it? What is the final goal? What is the purpose of that all? Since we crave to reinforce civil society in every country that we work in, we can discuss practically any subjects. When they are relevant, we should look for experts. We should find experts who work on this and who work on this topic. So whatever says strengthen civil society, this is the most important thing. And all the rest follows from that. This is exchanges between experts, between students. They are education, just trips. This is expertise. A lot of education. We work. We also teach. It is very important for us, the sustainability. It's not about environmental issues, but indeed in social issues. What does it mean? What our life would be like in 10 years' time, in 30 years' time? And as you understand, all the questions to live in one place. People hailing from different cultures, different layers, and this is a moment about integration. This is the key to all of us. It has become even stronger because of the flows of refugees and migrants, not only in Germany and the EU, but I suppose this is a trend that will get even stronger. What is below? This is for us probably also one of the factors that are decisive. Networking, it's just such a beaten track sort of notion when everybody knows whether it would work or not. It's always fine when it works out, but we don't know it. But if we don't meet, if we don't have sessions, if we don't discuss openly the sore issues, we won't reach anything. This community between the two countries, between the two groups or more, can only rise in case we have open communication and real-life context. Below to your right, this is unfortunately something is getting stronger. Although we all of us want something good to happen, there are negative trends also. They are in place and they are very strong. And something seemingly impossible, like we've reached a stage of war, but even in the very European space. And this is something that horrifies us, and you will see how this happens. Well, just an example. We've worked with Ukraine for 25 years. We could create groups from Poland, Germany, and that would go to that territory in Donbass to see what was going on there. We asked people what happened. It happened in 2012, 2015, 2016, but it's clear that we went there deliberately, on purpose, just there, because all our interests are at stake there, both in terms of information purity, whereas the development of our countries is concerned, and our interaction, and in general our ability to speak to each other about the future. And besides, people are dying there, have been dying quite a lot, quite many. And one of the consequences was that we've been together for a year and a half. This platform, Civil Plus, which has been putting together all those organizations in Warsaw. In June we had about 40 that really work on Donbass from very different perspectives. They work with refugees, about monitoring, about mobility, about education on those territories, about legal issues, and a lot of humanitarian things, and what they can do together to make it better, and how they can influence the official events, which are so far unpredictable, which sometimes may be unexpected. Tomorrow it may be UN, and still it doesn't mean much in terms of resolution of this conflict, rather than yet another organization will be attracted to its resolution. But overall, we have a very, what was range of topics and projects. I will just briefly call them and then I'll draw your attention to others. Move on together civic education. This is a major project on civic education between Germany, Russia, Ukraine and Georgia. Well, think of it, there's a lot of internal conflicts within that. But first and foremost, we must look what are the models for society, what do politicians can offer on both sides, and how to deliberately attempt something. They also, under this project, carry out what they call simulated elections and see that what any party suggests, and then they look, and indeed real vote is on. This is for people under 18. And there is a website, I will show it later to you, yes, that reflects it all. And now, in Russia it certainly is very, very, but in Ukraine there are thousands and thousands of people who take part. Major forum in Kiev. This also shows to some extent how our society is prepared, whether we are prepared for that step or not. Something that came as a surprise for us, well, football, friends, culture and open society thing. This, in point of fact, is about civil society too. Because first of all, well, millions think that they are just fans of some team or another. A lot has been going on. There's a lot of violence and there are fightings and quite a lot of social groups, and this is where we also see conflicts and between, so to say, police and some groups. And this has to be understood what you do about this, especially given that next year we will have World Championship in Russia, for example. Ukrainians do not intend to travel there because the conflict is obvious, and this is where we see representatives of different teams that speak to each other, how they work with for soccer fans, how they work in their society, and what does it mean, even in social pedagogics. Well, I've already discussed that. Annual conference meetings in autumn. It is something like a key event for us, usually takes place in November. And each time we look at a topic that is very important for us. This year, as you can imagine, that would be defending democratic institutions, because now it's not clear how, given this sort of populism and radicalism, how can one keep in place independent resources for civil society. They are independent resources. We do it with organizations with they have hundreds of partners across the country that learn here how they can in their country make the money or train people who support it. Well, I suppose that it is a very good project because it works for sustainability of the third sector. For us, it's a major civil society forum. We were ones who initiated that in 2009. We had a working group on the relations between the EU and Russia, and that was one of ideas that really came to life. It has now 150 organizations with major problem. In the last 4 years, the Secretariat of the Civic Forum has been with us. It will now be like they have an independent civil forum, and I suppose this is truly a major structure, and many of you can be maybe interested in that and maybe somehow help European civil society. And we also set up these European working groups from our members. What matters for us immensely is the participation of volunteers in these organizations, because it means that people who in principle know some subject or another, but their job is they still make a huge contribution, and this is where a lot has been happening. And first and foremost, this is a conversation about the 20th century. This is what interests most people most, very much like, well, transition dialogue. I'll say a few words about it. This is a topic that also should involve us even more. Nowadays it's like history, but it continues. 99 is now far away, 92 is far away, but still the experience of the 1990s and how we turned from socialist countries into something else. It is something that brings us together and at the same time really disunites us. Because if you look at it, we only published a small book. There it is, in several copies are available. If you want, you can look them up. There they are. I suppose that this is a topic to be considered by our generation, because it predetermines how we behave, how we are capable of, what do we do about thinking, about working, and what we do there. I may be missing, yes, overcoming consequences. Well, to overcome the consequences of war means to, again, about Eastern Ukraine, about refugees mostly, and about anti-discrimination. Armenia, for example, is taking part there too. Well, civil solidarity is a platform of civil rights activists where we coordinate several events. In a very important point, there are interrelations between law and war and terror. This is another point that you all must have noticed. When they say you should fight terror, it usually means that you need to lose rights and a feeling of protection and how to strike the balance. This is another topic that I was happy here to meet a colleague from Ingushetia, because we have a project together which has been on first in North Ossetia, now in Ingushetia, and in part in Dagestan. This was about exactly how to build stable socioeconomic conditions, how to help them overcome the tension between different groups in society. Sometimes it can be interreligious, sometimes it may be interethnic. Well, it's a difficult region, a difficult project, but really a lot is happening there, and I'm so pleased that you are here with us. Well, a major project for us is, well, climate change and conservation. Yes, it's about sustainability. This is that where we have joint space. Where is it? This is about the air, this is about the sea. They don't recognize any borders. And it's really high time to look into it together. We should say that people from Eastern Europe are very keen on that. And urbanistics, both at the level of UN, but it almost doesn't have anything to do with other countries in Europe. And this, in point of fact, doesn't influence other European colleagues. Well, Civic Partnership in Moscow, these are sister cities, very difficult partnership. We involve the young people, and this is to do with expert exchange. Well, I probably am moving in the wrong way. Yes, this is something I pointed out. We are within this climate change thing for 7 years. Every year we have been taking journalists and NGO specialists from to attend summits, UN summits, and it happened a very important thing. So that you should not only about contact and knowledge, but indeed so that this topic should be recognized here. And this link between journalists and representatives of the NGO sector, this is truly very relevant, because only when and what NGOs do, when this goes towards society at large, only then can it be efficient. I pointed it out 2 weeks ago. We were here at Warsaw, and at a major OSCE conference introduced this platform, OSCE Plus. Why is it known by this name? First, we had an idea to call it Civic Minsk.
And as the time went, there was a lot of criticism with respect to this. We thought that this is not just about Minsk and these botched negotiations and agreements, but that it should also be about monitoring and peacekeeping, the memory, historical memory. And so we believe that civil society is not just about these countries, but all of us. It's not just about official negotiations, but a lot more. And civic coalition, which would be participating with respect to many issues. This somewhat strange arrow, I think that we should probably, it's a bit too strong an image, but we decided to leave it. Civic activity is, of course, not always welcome, and the more so oppositionary activity. So the question really is, what is the benefit for such rallies, like in the case of Maidan, and what do we see at the grassroots level, like say Hamburg case, because the G20 summit still causes a lot of discussion, and so not everything is crumbling apart, but a lot of bad things are happening. That's true. The German Parliament. For the first time in many years, the right-wing populists were elected in the German parliament, and these are generally people who have a high degree of distrust towards people coming from other countries, other cultures, with the very different attitudes. And there's, of course, there has been a lot of talk about social equality and the pay, the wages. But of course, this shadowed the important question that the dissent was relating to the relative benefits of the migrants and us, that is the residents. So you're seeing the balances in the right column, the balance between these contradictory items and the accessibility of many things. This is something that sets Germany in motion in terms of social discussion. Well, freedom and security, I've already mentioned, that spills over into the foreign policy, which is often carried out in the name of values, but only in declaration. So one has to look this and consider this from different sides, and that's a significant part. This middle column is interesting because the majority of people in Germany who have voted for the right-wing populists are primarily relatively well-off people, not so much the proletariat, not so much the working class, if you wish. So there were a lot of even academics and persons with means who voted for the right-wing party. Over the past 25 years, we have suffered many defeats. Already in 1991, we believed that the common European space has been won. Secondly, because we believed that both development they'll be going faster. The stability will be installed early. And what would happen then? We were hoping that the democratic societies should work at one level. They should interact. Unfortunately, this is not often the case. Why? Because a lot that is being expected was coming from the Western Europe, and this often distorts the balance. One cannot say that democracy rules in all of our countries, and we, of course, know the case about Russia, and here from Poland we're seeing and observing with great anxiety how the civil society is struggling to protect itself, democratic institutions and values. We'll see how things will evolve in Germany, France, in Spain, in Catalonia. We do not know what will be happening very soon. Often we dispute with colleagues and friends as to what we should be engaged with, the big projects or the small things. In Russia, there is this narrative, small things first, bigger things later. Well, I think that both are necessary and at the same time, simultaneously. You may have noticed that we are trying to pursue both of these lines in our program, and as soon as it is possible, because neglecting the big things, the big projects, the big business, as they say, may indeed cost us years. And an important question, which is also of great importance to us. Of course, NGOs say that there will be no change without us, but that's not quite true. First, the situation is often simply moving people to change something, and so the source of change is not necessarily NGOs. One of the last pieces of dialogue is that there is often a question of why there are such agonizing discussions, and we want to be respected, we want to be appreciated, and so on and so forth. Well, this is true. Such is the wisdom of our diplomacy. But if we're not open, that means that we'll be dealing with empty things. Because saying that this can be said and this cannot be said, that we can only be able to talk about this in 3 years, this is a wrong practice. Because when you say something open and when you're saying this with attention and with interest, then communication becomes a lot more candid, straightforward, and productive. Nikolai Mitrokhin had a great presentation yesterday, and I'm glad that he came here. There was He raised the question about the third sector or the non-commercial sector, if these are volunteers or paid professionals. I agree with him entirely that creating an organization, developing a project only because there is money available for it is a pointless thing. Because without personal energy, without personal interest, because without personal involvement, this will only be an imitation. But the fact is clear that the third sector needs both volunteers and professionals, because in the absence of professionals, such organizations will simply not be able to influence some fundamental questions in the wide array of things. So this is often a question of knowing, of expert knowledge, and it is only through joint efforts of the volunteers and the professionals that many goals are achieved. Many goals are scored, indeed. Now, this is where we are. I have as yet not mentioned the agent law, foreign agent law, which is in the air. Unfortunately, this is not only a Russian invention. This is something that we already see in Hungary, something that may well elope in Poland. But this is something against us. Because being together in the European space means to be agent of business, an agent of case, an agent of particular interest. And this is something be financed from different funds, from different monies, from different sources. And this is not a matter of principal importance. So that is why we're always interested in knowing what we do and for what purpose, why, with whom, and where. And these are all key questions which are salient for all NGOs. Thank you. Well, I understand that we are already entering this discussion, so let me just be very, very brief. I will rather not be talking about our organization, but rather enter this discussion. I teach at the Institute of International Affairs, and I also head the Freedom House branch in Vilnius, and I have co-founded at least two volunteer organizations, and there is a think tank in Vilnius which is called the Center for the Brainstorm Center, Eastern European Studies, and this is a professional organization. So my entire work and my intervention today is based on my practice. How many of you do you believe to be civic activists? How many of you have many of you been advised to turn for psychological help? Why am I asking this? Because one of the problems with civic society is, and this is a discussion that we have had before, what is a citizen, what is civil society? We're all citizens, and going for elections is something that we must do, but this is not about civil society. And the fact that we have 140 million people in this country is not something that defines the civil society. So there is a potential, but I can see that many civic activists need to have psychological help. Why? because there's a great weariness, a great fatigue from what we do, a lot of challenges, and indeed, often it seems that we're simply botched by problems, and there are not many achievements. Very few people value this work and say thank you. So there is this routine part of the civic activism, and conferences, seminars. There are many things which are really very, very weary. There's a lot of imitation too, not just professionalism, and this imitation certainly harms the reputation of civil society. So it is not only about repressions against us or some repressive laws, but also if we are candid and sincere in representing the interests and the people that we represent. As I concede, many things must be done because we think that this is important. I was once present for a seminar in the United States, which convened civic activists from Mali to Latin America. And me, a Lithuanian, I come from Lithuania, and I say there is not much to do. I deal primarily with Belarus because, but this is a joke. And Anatoly Mikhailov was there, and I started with my civic activism just because I worked for this Institute of International Affairs, and the university that Mr. Mikhailov was the president of was banished from Belarus. So we accommodated this university when it emigrated to Vilnius, to Lithuania. This is how I started. But I saw what was happening in Belarus. I saw that if any individual was showing or taking a civic stance, he could be expelled from the university and his parents could lose job. And of course, I thought this is wrong. The other thing I understood in a matter of several months was that how much happier I am that I was born 30 kilometers from on that part of the border, not on the other part of the side of the border, and how appreciative I should be of this, and how much I should do to keep these processes alive, because this is not something to be taken for granted, even in a democratic society. And the Freedom House has shown that, in principle, we can see that the processes of democracy, and there is less democracy, there is less freedom. It's a shrinking concept. This is not just about Russia, Azerbaijan, and Tajikistan. It's even about us here in Europe. So, as I concede, most citizens in Europe, of the European states, have been spoiled by this benevolent political history of the past several decades, and they think that this is granted. And what the civic activists do is that they just deal with the little petty things, with their grants, reports, monies, and sometimes they wish to be privileged, wish to look as privileged people, and there is not much things that is happening in the regions. They are primarily concentrated in the capital. They sit in the nice hotels, go to conferences, and so on, and so forth. So the referenda in Europe and many of the social protest movements in Europe show that there is and there are some very difficult social situations which are getting mature in Europe or have already erupted into problems. Indeed, how can I talk about civic situation and human rights in other countries if I have unresolved problems at home in my domestic affairs? So, I would say that one of the most interesting things is being a civil activist in countries of transition, like in the Ukraine, in Moldova, and elsewhere. Because if you are in oppressive countries, then of course there is the ghetto problem. Is that the civil activism becomes ghettoed. I used to work in Cuba with some political activists, those who work in culture, and I saw a lot of energy and a lot of danger and not much opportunity. Here we have a very different situation. There's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of energy, but not much. There's much more apathy than energy, and there's not much danger. So it's judging from my experience. And I talk about the students of this Institute of International Affairs. They have three major goals: to do something for their organization, for the Vilnius University, and for Lithuania. So this is a volunteer organization, and the most important thing is that they do many seminars. They conduct and in many cases we go to the Russian-speaking regions. We try to make people. One of our major tasks is to span bridges, and if we talk about the ex-Soviet Union, fragmentation of the society literally struck all ex-USSR republics, and building back these connections, spanning back these bridges is a major task. Individualism is extremely strong in most of the post-Soviet space countries, and in countries like Belarus, it is this atomization or fragmentation continues, and those who stand out may well be clubbed on their head. This is to say that in many cases there can be just a matter of acquainting people, bringing people together, working out a spirit of cooperation. When I see conferences with over 100 people sitting, is a huge network whereby you have a great potential, and I hope this does not end with some with the conference hall. So our major challenge today is when the countries with oppressive regimes, because the foreign agent law is based on Belarusian example. Regimes try to learn from each other, and this is a problem. Or let us say something needs to be done in Armenia or somewhere else, and transfrontier cooperation is just as important. It is equally important to have the industry or transdisciplinary work. So, building out these things, and they will so we think that the civil society is not just about NGO. There are a lot of NGOs in Russia, but this is not in itself indicative of the state of the civil society. So in many cases it's about quality and not just the number or the quantity. There's some very interesting organizations which will report today. And so I think that you just have to do everything in your power to continue and show that civil society is not or civil activism is not a lost cause, and that civil society not only must be preserved but must expand and not shrink. Whereas civil society can only continue to develop if there is trust towards each other, which is not to say that you have to become personally a civic activist, but it is important that you help. And we have seen some cases, and there are a lot of persons from regions, and in some cases there are no persons who we don't need the civil society to become an illusion.